Welcome to the inaugural Midwest AIS webinar of the webinar series. I'm Ryan Schetzler. I'm the president of Midwest AIS for this year. And here we have Gaurav and Noah who will be presenting for us today. As we're getting started, I just wanted to highlight the conference, the upcoming conference for next year, May 28th and 29th, 2020 in Des Moines, being hosted at Drake University, and it's going to be great. They've got the call for papers. You can see the URL for the website up there. So check out the website, check out the call for papers, and consider submitting because it's a good conference and it's a lot of fun. So I'm going to go ahead now and hand it over. We'll hand over control.
Yeah, thank you, Ryan. This is Gaurav here. Welcome all. And I'm here with my student here, Noah.
Hello, everyone. Share this here. So this will be our research title here. It was Trust Violations and Rebuilding After a Data Breach, specifically the role of environmental stewardship and underlying motives. So Ryan, if you could throw up those poll questions here really quick and we'll see how those go. If you guys want to just answer these 3 questions here and then we can get into some responses quick.
Could you clarify what you mean by CSR activities?
CSR activities is how we defined it was the corporate social responsibility initiatives, or what they're doing for the community or how to give back from their business practices.
All right, we've got 2 votes.
Okay, good.
So here in our first question, let's go there. It's going to be how many data breaches were there in 2018 versus 2004? We did the research, and from 2004 to 2018, there was 10 times more data breaches in those years. And we found that just absolutely astonishing that amount of data breaches could increase by 10 times over that short amount of time as the internet built up. Our second thing we kind of touched on is if consumers tend to buy from companies that are engaged in a CSR activity, and if that really means something to the consumer. And throughout all of our research, we found that this is absolutely true, that depending on any kind of study that's going to come back, if a company wants to be good to its customers and give back to the community that it's part of, the customers are going to continue to come back and want to conduct business with them. And then our third and final question that we wanted to look at was, do consumers tend to buy from companies that are engaged in a profit motive CSR initiative? And how we defined that was as the company giving back to the community only to receive benefit for themselves, kind of that they wanted to make sure that they were going to get something back if they did that good thing, where we also use our other centered companies as a company that's giving back to the community just for anyone's good.
Well, thank you, Noah, and thank you for the audience poll. This is a wonderful, this sets the motivation for our research. So let's take a look at our first question. So we found that 50% of you said they went up by 10 times, which is actually right. But 50%, which is 1% in this case, also felt that they went up by 100 times, which actually is perception, when we were looking at this question, even we were thinking 10 times seems to be a little low on the lower side. So we examined number of breaches and number of records breached, and both were actually about around 10 times. So, but the general perception is about 100 times. So we are not surprised that we got 50% split. Even though our sample size is 2, it basically reflects the general perception that there are more breaches. Second question is also sets our motivation that CSR leads to higher trust, and people will tend to buy more from those companies which are engaged in higher and more CSR activities. And the third question also goes towards our research, kind of directs towards our research question a little bit, and that companies which are perceived to be selfish and they are exploiting CSR, people don't want to buy. So even though our sample size is 2, that basically very nicely captures the sentiments and the perceptions about CSR in general public. So yeah, thank you for the polls.
Alrighty, getting into beginning of our PowerPoint. Our kind of research questions that we had laid out for ourselves to use were, first of all, can CSR be used as a shield to cushion trust violations and then aid in trust repair following a data breach? So this is really what sparked our research in corporate social responsibility initiatives and how it's going to affect the company.
So as we just saw in our polling question that CSR, that companies which have higher CSR presence, people want to buy more from them. So we thought that if people trust these companies which have higher CSR, can CSR be used as a shield in case of a trust violation? So we are extending that idea that people trust companies which have higher CSR can they use that trust to shield against a trust violation process? Second is, does that selfishness, those companies which use CSR genuinely, do they have any advantage over those companies which use CSR for selfish motives? So that is kind of driven by our third poll question, that companies which use CSR for profit motives, people tend to buy less from them.
So we really wanted to see if that heartfelt giving back to the community, giving back to its consumers is seen as being important to the consumer, how we kind of felt that it was to us. So how we defined CSR that we use throughout this entire presentation quite frequently is a concept whereby companies integrate social and environmental concerns into their business operations and in their interaction with their stakeholders voluntarily. So the big part of this is going to be voluntarily. There are a lot of, regulations and government mandated things that a company must do for, its area and where it is. But there's also things that companies will go out of their way to do to just help out where they are located.
So I want to add something to CSR. There are 3 other types of CSR definitions. One is CSR for employees, CSR for government, CSR for customers. We are focusing on environmental issues, so that's why we took this definition, which is particularly aiming towards social and environmental concerns.
So why does CSR matter? There's kind of 3 main parts to it. It's going to be the identification, the genuine attribution, and then the insurance policy cover. And the identification is going to be kind of how we defined it was how people are going to see what they're giving, kind of what they're getting out of the company.
The value system.
The attribution is going to be, I don't know if you want to take this.
Sure. Yeah, identification, I want to add. So if customers can identify that the company is valuing the same value system which they value, so that leads to higher trust. Second is genuine attribution. So people who believe that this company is genuinely concerned about the environment, about the CSR, and is not exploiting it, that also leads to higher trust. And third is insurance policy cover. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, the insurance policy we used. It's a 2-way street for the insurance policy coverages. If there's a company doing a good amount of CSR to its community, it's going to give the consumer an insurance policy where they see that a company is reaching out and helping. So it's going to build that trust between them. And it's also going to help the customer or the business when there's a problem later down, that they're going to have the consumer's trust already. They're going to know that they're a quality company that's really trying to provide quality products and quality service. So it's going to help them if they do run into a problem later on.
So insurance policy cover, the way we argue is that it provides an insurance policy to basically both the business as well as the customer. But here it matters more for the business because if they are engaged in CSR, so customers will will stay loyal to them because they will believe that company is benevolent to them. And so this trust of the customers acts as the insurance policy cover in case the company has to face a service failure, so they can rely on the loyal customer base to stay loyal to them.
So for genuine, or what we considered other-centered CSR, and why it matters even more, you're going to have a much higher value from all those parts that we just discussed, because it's that view of people receiving genuine help, being not just hoping they receive something in return, but honestly reaching out to try and just help. They're going to get a much higher identification with the consumer. You're going to have a much higher genuine attribution view because people are going to see it for what it is. And we actually did find in our research that consumers can pick out those little things of that they'll see right through you being kind of self-centered and just wanting something in return. They give you a little bit, but they're going to take back so much more business versus when companies really just want to reach out and help.
So actually what we found is that even in the literature, the CSR has been examined from two perspectives: genuine CSR versus self-centered. Genuine means other-centered CSR, focusing on environment and other people and other issues, versus self-centered CSR, which is selfish-oriented, profit exploitation kind of CSR. So in this case, so we have a hypothesis whether the genuine centered, the other-centered CSR, does it provide any strategic advantage in case of a trust violation as opposed to a self-centered CSR?
So here's our literature review, kind of, if we want to go through this too much in depth.
So we basically kind of rely on the recent stream of work, which is in the area of trust violation and rebuilding. So this is one of my own papers in 2015, where we talked about, we basically examined the impact of apology versus denial in restoring the trust after a data breach. The apology or the denial coming from a company CEO, the company which was breached, to help restore the trust. And we found that apology is more effective than a breach. So the idea built upon that if the apology can be effective in rebuilding a trust after a breach, can the perceived CSR initiatives, can they also be effective in building, in kind of preventing the trust after the breach from falling, and also helping to regain the trust after the breach, after it has been fallen down.
Mm-hmm.
Second stream we look at is Choi and Lau 2013, which also argue that CSR also has an ethical component, and that companies engaged in CSR are perceived as more trustworthy. There is another stream of research done by Sen and Bhattacharya in marketing, where they have looked at CSR from trust perspective in marketing area, whether people want to tend to buy more if they perceive company is engaged in CSR.
And just to add kind of on the side, being able to use Dr. Bansal's papers throughout all of this, he's done an extensive amount of work in the trust violation, data breaches, and how to kind of rebuild that relationship with your consumer. Being able to use papers such as this first one on the screen was an immense help to our papers, kind of using that previous knowledge that he had so we could analyze the data we took and kind of provide the questionnaires that we gave to our participants in the study in the most effective way possible the first time, so that we could kind of really get a start on our data collection. So going into kind of more of our hypotheses for this research, trust drops more when there's no CSR. That was kind of our thoughts originally. If there's nothing there that the company's doing, that there's going to be a much larger trust drop when something goes wrong, such as a data breach. So this just kind of shows how we were visualizing that right away. You want to add in,
so that's our hypothesis, yeah.
The next one of our hypotheses is going to be right over here. It's going to be the trust drops more for the self-centered CSR initiatives versus the other-centered ones. So on this, we're going to see our other-centered up here at the top, kind of at a higher value with our profit motives kind of really not deriving as much help. And then we also have our ethics on the top right-hand corner, that if someone is providing an ethical business practice, it's going to be seen as value, since there is somewhat of that ethical component to the CSR initiatives.
So Noah rightly said, there is an ethical component to CSR. So we are using ethical practices as basically control group. So we want to compare that. Is genuine CSR leads to more higher trust after a breach, as opposed to a self-centered CSR, and also compare this with our control group that does ethical CSR, basically based on ethical practices. Does company known for ethical practices, will they experience higher trust after a breach as opposed to a company, self-centered CSR company, which gets breached? So at this time, I will open up to see if audience have any questions.
Don't know if it's Ryan, if they were unmuted, or
Ryan, can we unmute Ryan?
Jordan got unmuted there. Do you have a question, Jordan?
No. So far, I don't know how I got unmuted.
Okay, so let's keep going. Okay, yeah. Any questions from you, Ryan, at this time?
Not at this time.
Okay, good. So, then we move to our next hypothesis. Yeah, go ahead, Noah.
Back here. So this was kind of our trust restoration side of things. We had our trust drop, but then after we had issued a subsequent apology to the consumers for what had happened, we wanted to see how those initiatives are going to affect the restoration of that trust, kind of bringing it back to where we were when we started. And we figured that we're going to see a much higher restoration with the other-centered CSR groups versus the self-centered groups and the control group who's really not doing as much. We figured that it was kind of going to be in stages of the self-centered at the bottom, control, and then other-centered.
Actually, let me add something here. The control group here, so in our mind, we have a hypothesis about the ethical. So we have in mind, hypotheses are driven around 4 companies. One company is engaged in genuine CSR, which is they really care about the environment, and they are genuinely caring about the environment. Second group here is the self-centered CSR company, which is focusing just on exploiting the CSR initiatives to make more profit. Third is, as you saw in our previous hypothesis, relates to ethical practices, that a company which is engaged in pursuing ethical practices. So it is known for ethical practices. The fourth company which we have here is basically control, which means it is not known for any initiative, just a simple website. So in this hypothesis, we don't have any comparison with the ethical group, because we argue that the ethical group should be similar to genuine CSR. So we don't want to, so you can say that we don't foresee or hypothesize any significant difference in trust restoration between other-centered or genuine CSR versus ethical CSR. So this hypothesis 2 actually relates to two parts, A and B. So the part A is that in case of genuine CSR, the trust rebuilding, the restored trust will be higher than the trust restoration in self-centered based CSR company. And the second part is that the trust restoration in genuine CSR will be higher than in any other control company, which is not pursuing any CSR initiative.
Going forward here, this is kind of our next hypothesis, and we involve PC, which is going to be privacy concern. So the customer that has a privacy concern, is going to create a higher trust drop and a lower trust restoration. So when someone has that concern of privacy and their information, especially in this day and age, you're going to see a much higher loss of trust with your consumers. And once you lose that trust, it's going to be much harder to regain that trust in the future.
So let me add that this is a three-part process. So one is the initial trust. Second part is the breach happens and your trust drops. The third part is the company issues apology and the trust comes back as restoration. So in second part, if people are have high privacy concern, they will experience more drop after the breach because they have higher concern. So a breach loss means they are like privacy is exposed, less protection, and so lead to more drop. So even though the company issues apology, because people have higher privacy concern, it will lead to lower trust restoration because they will feel that the information has been stolen, has been breached. And once information has been shared, it cannot be unshared, you know. So that privacy concern will prevent them from experiencing higher trust restoration. So that's our A component of hypothesis 3.
Going forth to our B component, we kind of tried to display this as best as possible, that we still have our privacy concern, and then on top we're going to have our CSR initiatives, and that's where we wanted to kind of make a visual component for the shielding the trust. And so what we have is the CSR on top is going to try and lower that trust drop along with increase that restoration. Connecting it to 3C, which I will go on to here somewhat quickly because they are very similar. What we looked at here is that our privacy concern, we are going to add a whole nother layer of that genuine CSR. So versus just a regular CSR initiative to a genuine CSR initiative, it's going to kind of give you another layer of protection. So you're going to have double the trust or protection from trust drop and double the benefit when it comes to trust restoration in the future.
Well, it's not exactly about double, but yeah, like Noah got the idea, right? Thank you, Noah. So the idea is that the CSR initiative by themselves, if company is engaged in CSR versus no CSR, so CSR will shield the company from, will give insurance cover, and people will experience less drop for given privacy concern, and they will also experience more trust restoration for given privacy concern because the company is perceived as more benevolent or more identifiable or with the CSR initiatives. However, if the company is doing genuine CSR as opposed to self-centered CSR, the genuine CSR will give more protection than if the company is perceived to be following a self-centered CSR.
So going forward, we're going to start getting into more of our research methodology of everything. This here is the website that we showed all the different groups. We had a furniture store called Warehouse eMart, and every participant in the survey saw this exact same picture. The only thing that changed going forward then was the description we gave each participant to see each different initiative. This is going to be right here. So for W1, which is going to be our first website, that's going to be the environmental CSR. W2 is going to be our for-profit environmental. Somewhat what they were doing was using recycled wood, but the only reason they were doing that is because it saved them money in their production. W3 is going to be our ethical component. They were just a work kind of seen as a very ethical labor practices. They just followed all the rules and we're just an ethical company. W4 is going to be our control group, and it says nothing about any type of CSR initiatives, ethics. It just states that you are planning on buying furniture for your family. You come across Warehouse eMart online and you are able to find this site searching on Google. It's just a basic website you came across, and that's how we tried to use the most control.
Thanks, Noah. And we have summarized these 4 scenarios in the green boxes on the right. So like W1 is the like genuine CSR, which is award-winning environmental CSR practices. So like third parties have recognized that this company is really helping the environment. So we try to focus it, basically portray it as a genuine CSR website. W2, we did not associate W2 with any third-party recognition. So that is the idea, is that it should be manipulated as using CSR for profit motive. Third is we talk about ethical practices. So just to contrast, if W1 and W2 or control group, if W3 is any different than W1, W2 in particular, and then W4 is our true control group. In fact, W3 is also a control group because ethical component, we want to filter out the effect of ethical component. So this is our flowchart of our experiment design. So first, the participants were to give a consent form. They have to agree to that to move forward. We show them, each participant only saw one of the 4 websites. And then third was we checked the attention check questions and then manipulation check questions. So because we wanted to make sure that people who got W1, that they perceived W1 as higher genuine CSR versus W2. And so that's our manipulation check question. Then fifth is attribution. We measured how much they associate each website with self-centered CSR attribution. 6 is environmental consciousness, because people who are more environmentally conscious might rate these websites differently because they are more into environmental consciousness.
And then for step 7, that's when we provided each participant with the breach news. We said, this company has been hacked, your data was stolen. And that kind of was our then lead into number 8, where they were shown that the trust was violated. They had lost some type of data from that company. So we then retested the data for trust 2, what we called it, and saw how much of that trust was lost from the initial trust when they started working with the company to after that they had lost some data. We then looked at the trust propensity of kind of each consumer and each company.
No, each respondent.
Yeah, for each particular initiative. We then kind of went into the demographics just to see where our answers were coming from, everything. So we had more information to kind of analyze. Then we, at the end, had another attention check question just to make sure that everyone was still paying attention and still engaged with the activity, so that we weren't getting any data that wasn't going to be strong quality data. And finally, we had another manipulation check question just to confirm that everyone was understanding they were seeing an environmental company or they were seeing a profit motive company, so that we could make sure they were seeing and understanding our questions properly. So here's going to be our kind of how
manipulation check
of the data, and how we see that is going to be the environmental company was seen as very high, very quality
genuine CSR.
That's then going to drop for the profit motive, which we had labeled the economic group. We see a drop. We then see a further drop in the ethics group, which really surprised us personally, that there would be a higher CSR correlation in the economics group versus the ethics group. And then our control group was listed at the bottom for.
Yeah, thank you, Noah. This shows that our manipulation was successful. So the environment is basically W1 website. So people perceive W1 website as higher CSR, like positive attributions. Economics, that's our W2, like profit motive. The profit motive, or we should say self-centered CSR, that was significantly less than our first website. And the ethics website was significantly less than the W2. And the control group was even significantly less than the ethics group. So this is interesting because we were thinking that ethics group will actually be perceived more closer to profit motive or environmental motive. But this is interesting that people valued CSR initiatives much more, the environmental CSR initiatives, than the ethics practices.
So this is going to just kind of display our demographics for who we interviewed and the participants we received information from. And as you can see, it very much ranges all over. We have age ranges from 2019 being our youngest to 91 being our oldest participant in the study. So we were very happy to see that. We wanted to hear from lots of different respondents and get a large group. We also can see that there's a large swing between males and females. It's about equal. And when you kind of break down the numbers, that we had almost equal amounts male as female participants with a very large age range in between.
Yeah, our sample size was 500. We only used 311 because we eliminated some of the respondents which failed the attention check questions. We had 3 attention check questions which we repeated. So we had 6 attention check questions altogether, 3 in the beginning and 3 towards the end. So all about 100 people failed our attention check questions, and roughly 100 people failed our manipulation check questions. So we used only those people in our study at this time who passed both the attention check questions as well as the manipulation check questions.
One thing going forward in the future, something that we would really like to focus on that we have discussed quite a bit is taking those respondents who had failed our attribution check questions and how they felt, what company they were seeing, and putting their data into the company's profile that they figured that they saw. So if someone had been shown the ethics slides but felt that it was the environmental slides, putting their data into the environmental group so that we could kind of reanalyze it and see it as how they viewed it.
Using more sample size.
So the results that we found support for during our project was going to be the trust restoration is higher for W1 versus W2. So the genuine CSR versus profit motive, it really does help. There's a higher trust restoration after there is some violation there. The next hypothesis we really did see support for was privacy concern drops, or privacy concern increases the drop when there is no CSR initiative in place at all. So as long as you're doing something, whether it is profit motive, isn't profit motive, it still does help to be giving back to the community in some way. Finally, we did also see privacy concern lowers the trust restoration for self-centered as opposed to other-centered. So like I said previously, that consumers really do see that difference between self-centered initiatives and other-centered initiatives. And other-centered initiatives are going to get you much farther with your consumers versus an other-centered initiative where you're, just doing it for profit motive, just doing it for company benefit.
Okay. So this is a summary table of our hypothesis and our results. So we had altogether 3 hypotheses. The first one had 3 components, second one has 2 components, and third one has 3 components as well. So the first one was we had a reverse support that trust drop is higher for W2 than for W1. We found that it is reverse supported. We found that there was a higher trust drop for W1 after the breach than for W2, but it is only at 0.10 level. And the way we explain this reverse finding is that people were expecting more from W1. If a company is so highly respected and if they have a breach, so people got hurt more, because you get hurt more from the people, those who you love more. So that probably explains why people experienced higher drop from W1 than they experienced from W2 after the breach. This needs to be investigated even more because this was only at 0.10 level, but something to examine again in future research. Second thing which we found supported was H2A, that after the breach, the trust restoration is higher for W1 than for W2. And also one H3B is supported, where PC increases trust drop only when there is no CSR. So if there is no CSR, PC, the privacy concern will lead people to experience more trust drop after the breach, because the CSR provides the insurance policy effect. It provides benevolence. So when people feel no benevolence in that form of CSR, so for that same given level of privacy concern, they will experience more trust drop. So this is interesting finding that, in fact, actually look at H3C, second part, that PC lowers restoration for self-centered than for other-centered. So in my previous work, we have looked at how can companies actively restore trust, from apology versus denial and things like that. This study actually shows that there can be some passive passive intervention as well in terms of CSR. So as the other stream of research shows that active intervention in terms of apology is more effective than denial. But this research shows that basically passive intervention in terms of CSR can also be effective in terms of trust restoration.
If you want to explain this one here.
Yeah, so we also examined the trust drop and rebuilding in overall trust drop. So we had 4 groups. So you can see that the trust drop, there was higher trust drop in the self-centered. The W2 is self-centered, the profit motive group. So there were more drop in W2. And then you can see that the trust restoration is also the lowest in W2. So the self-centered website, which did not get any award for or recognition for the environmental initiatives. So it was actually people experienced more drop and significantly lower restoration in the self-centered CSR. And the good thing here is that the ethical practice website experienced less drop and more restoration than W2. So that actually, let me take it back. The W3 is our ethical group, right? So W2 was significantly less than W1. And then in case of trust restoration, W2 was also significantly less than W1. It was close to W3 in both the scenarios.
And we like to see this. It was very interesting to us that we really did all of our different companies were shown that way, and the customers felt that way, that the environmental company had kind of a higher attribution to it. And you can really see that in these charts here. Going forward, our theoretical and managerial implications of this. The theoretical side, as we put in here, our work shows that there is merits to examining this role of privacy concern and corporate social responsibility motives in trust violation and repair process, because as we saw in the data, all this does affect it. And in this day and age of companies being hacked and losing data, and just the amount of fight that a company has to put up to get a customer anymore, there's a very high cost of customer these days that you don't want to lose that trust, because there is that high cost of gaining that customer. Making sure you keep that customer in the end is going to be very important. So examining our work in the future for companies is going to be very beneficial to make sure that if something goes wrong, they're not going to go out of business soon after because they lost all their customers. Something in the more short term, the managerial implications we listed was, I don't know if you want to explain this one.
Sure, because this study, as I said earlier, has provide managerial implications that in case of a breach, there is active intervention by which companies can issue apology or denial, but they can also have CSR help for them. CSR can also work for them because their actions will also speak on their behalf. So there are definitely managerial implications.
It definitely is just one small part of kind of that process of going through something that happens. As Gaurav said, that his studies have showed many other ways that you need to handle these data breaches or problems with your customers, but this is definitely one of the big parts of it.
And there are, because these breaches are kind of a new phenomena, there is not much research out there on how companies can proactively or they can manage these breaches. And oftentimes you will see that companies kind of mishandle how they handle the whole process of trust restoration after the breach. And you will see a lot of things in the newspaper where they kind of hide the information about the breach, or they are not very forthcoming. They just don't have a proper mechanism, or they don't have systematic studies to guide them on how to react after the breaches. So this is a stream of research work in the direction to help to provide more guidance to such companies.
Some of our future research ideas definitely stems back to adding those participants who failed our manipulation check in our studies and adding them into the certain groups that they felt they were seeing. That's one of our big parts that we wanted to look at right away. Some of our other ideas that we had kind of thrown around and we're very interested in, we're going to be, I don't know if you want to explain the first one here. It's kind of,
Yeah, it's always helpful to do to examine such trust restoration issues in the actual field. field study environment. So, so other research can also look into longitudinal field studies. And the one thing which we think we want to look into going forward, or maybe we advise other future research to look into, is in our case, W1 was set up as a website which was recognized by third parties with awards, with recognition for environmental CSR. So maybe that might be playing a role in giving higher genuine attribution to this W1 as opposed to W2. So future research might want to look into the award issue, that how the award recognition plays a role there. And then all these items were self-reported, including initial validated and repaired trust. So other research can look into that, how they can look into the actual data, actual trust after the breach.
And along with that, just gaining more of a pool of data to really analyze so we can see as many perspectives as possible.
So now we open up for any questions.
See if we can unmute.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the presentation. The paper, I mean, the research seems very interesting. Actually, I've done a few similar research projects on this, and to me, it was very interesting. My only question is about maybe the conceptualization part of the paper. And my question is, how much do you think in real world customers know about any particular company CSR engagement and CSR activities? A lot of companies that face data breaches, they don't actually, users and customers do not usually go on their websites. For example, Uber as a case, they faced data breach in 2016 and then they announced in 2017, but users usually use only for example, Uber app for working with this company. And even those users who go on the websites, how much they care and they pay attention to information about CSR. I understand that in your research, you used experiment and you gave information about CSR activities. It's very understandable and it's fine. But what about in real world? What do you think that users and customers pay attention to the information about CSR? And finally, to me, just one suggestion. To me, CSR is more related to reputation of the company. In fact, some related studies, data breach studies like Jivebu et al. 2018 JMIS paper, they found that reputation affects, the negative consequences of data breaches. Maybe for me, CSR is an antecedent of reputation that affects, trust, restoration, and other things.
Sure.
Thank you.
No, very nice question. Thank you, Hamid.
First off, I think that's very good point at seeing what customers actually see companies doing. I think that's something that definitely needs to be looked into, of the real interaction and how much customers realize they're doing. And one thing that I think is huge, it depends on, is what kind of company they are. Big data companies, the one thing that came to mind for me was the Equifax data breach that recently happened. I think a lot of consumers don't see much of them, but have a lot of data held with them. Versus a company like Uber, maybe they do have a lot more attention to, depending on the company and what they're participating in. I think it's something that could be looked at, but I do think that consumers see that just from a almost advertising and marketing standpoint sometimes, that what they promote and what they show. We were recently just having a conversation about Coca-Cola providing plastic bottles that are going to be made out of recycled plastic pulled from the ocean, and how customers are going to receive that, whether it's a marketing ploy or if it's honest kind of giving back. We want to remove this plastic because we see we had a part in that, and all our plastic bottles end up in the ocean. We want to pull some of that back and try and kind of create a new product from that.
Very good, Noah. Hamid, I would like to add to what Noah said, that if our research shows that CSR helps in trust rebuilding, So maybe companies will have incentive to promote the CSR initiatives and to make their customers more aware of these activities, right? Because if there is a strategic advantage of being perceived as high CSR, so they want to educate, they want to first of all engage more into CSR, and then secondly, they want to share that information with their own customers. For your second question about your suggestion that reputation could be impacted with the CSR. So in this paper, we are examining trust, and trust and reputation go very well, hand to hand. There's a very high correlation between reputation and trust. So when CSR leads to drop in trust, I'm pretty sure it also leads to drop in reputation as well. So that's what I will say for now.
Okay, thank you and good luck.
Yeah, thank you, Hamid. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'll ask a question too.
Sure, Ryan.
This is more hypothetical, but in terms of timing of corporate social responsibility, do you think that a company could employ CSR activities after a breach? And would that have any help, or would that be seen as more of a desperate attempt to save themselves?
Mm-hmm. I think that's definitely a good point to look at. Part of our research with the insurance policy effect, we really wanted to look at if a company had already had it in place, will that insurance policy effect save them from that? Mm-hmm. And personally, my opinion, I think that if we did analyze that type of data, that people would see through it. Kind of how we expressed that people see that other-centered and self-centered initiatives, that I think people would see right through it very quickly. Just in my hypothetical opinion, the data could be much different than that, but it would be something to look at just for companies to have the data going forward.
Very nice point. No, I was just about to say the same thing, that if people feel that the self-centered CSR is less effective than genuine CSR, so anything which is perceived as exploitation of CSR to gain trust of customers, users, consumers, they see through that.
Yeah, it makes sense. Well, cool.
Yeah, so the strategy is to engage in CSR in a genuine way and stay engaged.
Yeah, I think that's mostly a big portion of it, but as long as you are doing that initiative in the first place, I think that's what's going to help you. But to really answer your question, quickly summarize, I don't think that would help if they employed it later on.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. That makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Any other question, Ryan, Hamid?
No, thank you. It was interesting to me.
Okay, thanks, Hamid. We're glad that you joined.
Thank you very much for your questions.
Yeah, great work.
Sounds good, yeah.
Sounds great. Sounds great.
Thank
Have
you,
a great
Hamid.
day,
Thank you,
everyone.
Ryan.
Thanks.
Thank you.